and we were taking off, and there was just an extreme wind noise. Extreme wind noise.
Well, it was going so calmly, and all of a sudden we heard this terrible noise in back of us.
The ceiling sort of vibrating, and I knew we were in trouble.
One of the roof panels flew up to the top of the plane, and all of a sudden we just immediately started going down.
I kind of ducked down into my mom, and the oxygen masks fell, and they weren't working good.
And the sun was shining through that side of the fuselage, and it was giving you an outline of the hole in the side of the plane.
Good evening, I'm Morton Dean, and this is Nightline. A hole erupts in the fuselage of a jetliner in flight. It raises new questions about our aging commercial air fleet. Just how old is too old for an airplane? That's our story tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Morton Dean.
First, some news about the investigation into the crash of Pan Am Flight 103. The London Times, in tomorrow morning's edition, reports that investigators have found heat damage to the plane and injuries to passengers that were most likely caused by an explosion. However, the possibility of structural failure has not been officially ruled out as a possible cause of the December 21st tragedy. The potential for catastrophic structural failures in jetliners is a major concern in this country, a growing concern because of the aging of America's passenger jets. Just yesterday, an aging Eastern Airlines plane lost part of its fuselage. We begin with a background report from Bettina Gregory.
Today, federal investigators inspected the 10 by 20-inch hole in the roof of the Eastern jet, which made a harrowing emergency landing yesterday in Charleston, West Virginia.
All of a sudden, you just heard like a boom, a bang, and everyone turned around. You just felt the air just come right out of the cabin towards the back. You felt it.
It was about 2 minutes of thinking that it's all over.
The 727 is almost 23 years old. Federal investigators say they still do not know why the roof failed, but the hole in the fuselage is part of a larger area that had been previously replaced.
When you have older machinery that you're operating, it's just like a car. You have more problems with it unless you get a lemon right from the factory. But you have to keep up the maintenance on it and the inspections like you would do a new airplane.
In fact, this 727 has undergone 27 repairs in the last 5 years, some for cracks, and it's made 7 unscheduled landings. Only one of them was called an emergency because it involved a similar loss of cabin pressure.
What you are seeing is, at least in part, one of the consequences of the aging fleet.
Experts say this latest incident is even more shocking because the FAA had ordered a special inspection of every Eastern plane earlier this year, a result of labor strife and persistent reports of shoddy maintenance. This 727 was last inspected in September. Still, aviation experts estimate that some sort of mechanical failure occurs on the nation's fleet of older airplanes, that is, planes 15 years or older, every 11 days. And America's air fleet is certainly getting older. In 1979, the average age of jets in use was just over 10 years. Today, it's 12 and a half. But Northwest, TWA, Eastern, United, and Pan Am's fleets are, for the most part, even older than that national average. It's now estimated that 1 out of every 4 planes used by America's 14 biggest airlines is 20 years old. By 1990, it's estimated 36% of the jets in use will be 20. But safety experts say it's not always the age of the aircraft that's the problem.
It's just the age, the chronological age. For example, an airplane was built in 1960, is now 28 years old. That does not necessarily mean that this airplane has been subjected to the maximum tolerable operating cycles. And that's the key, the operating cycles.
What he means by a cycle is a takeoff and landing. Metal fatigue is caused by stress, and every time a plane takes off, it expands slightly. This causes cracks in the fuselage, especially around the rivets holding the plane together. Every time it lands, it contracts. And the more flights a plane makes, the greater the stress. The result can be this: the Aloha 737, which ripped apart over Hawaii last April. That 737 had made 89,000 flights at the time it lost a third of its roof. After this dramatic incident, the FAA ordered emergency inspections of older 737s, restricted those which had made more than 55,000 flights to altitudes not exceeding 23,000 feet. And just 2 months ago, the FAA ordered 7,200 rivets in older 737s to be replaced. Still, critics say older planes should simply not be flying.
There's also the ultimate question of whether a plane, after a tremendous number of flight cycles, takeoffs and landings, should just be retired permanently from the U.S. fleet. All of these things need to be done by the FAA, and they really haven't been addressed as they should be.
Check it out. Over 9,000 mechanics of United Airlines work here.
Give me a mini grinder.
They're picky, fussy, stubborn. But if you fly, they're the best friends you'll ever have.
And the airlines are trying to reassure their passengers. Some remain unconvinced.
You got to be concerned. It seems like there's a lot of planes that are out there that are old at this point, and I'm just not sure if the airlines are even looking.
I told my kids and my husband, pray like crazy because I'm getting on a plane going to Mexico City.
In the 10 years since deregulation, airlines have been slow to replace their planes. Why? There are many reasons. Fare wars have left carriers with lower profits, less to spend on new planes. Low fuel prices made replacement of flying gas guzzlers less pressing. Airlines are dealing with airport congestion by buying and flying larger planes, not replacing the smaller jets. And even when airlines want to buy new planes, they can't always get them.
You can't buy airplanes. You'll wait, if you want to buy one, you'll wait 5 years.
For example, Boeing says it has the largest backlog of orders ever, over 1,000 planes. So the litany of incidents involving old planes continues. A 19-year-old Eastern DC-9 lands in Florida and the fuselage breaks in two. The FAA has investigated over 100 incidents or accidents involving U.S. airlines, commuter aircraft, or cargo planes with structural damage. Still, critics are demanding more action now.
We've seen several examples of airplane fuselage, skin, metal falling apart, breaking, ripping off, causing depressurization in mid-flight. How many more examples do we have to have of aging aircraft failure before the FAA and the airlines admit that the aging aircraft problem is of great concern?
To date, the FAA has not ordered any emergency or special inspections of 727s, though Eastern says it will inspect its entire fleet. However, it is possible that inspections may not be enough to catch metal fatigue, since unexpected problems keep turning up despite inspections. The FAA may have to think of more drastic measures to ensure that America's air fleet is safe. This is Bettina Gregory for Nightline in Washington.
When we come back, we'll talk with Clark Onstead, the Vice President of Eastern Airlines' parent company, Texas Air, with Anthony Broderick of the Federal Aviation Administration, and with John Gallipol, who heads a private organization concerned with airline safety.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Apple, makers of Macintosh.
Anthony Broderick is the FAA's Associate Administrator for Regulation and Certification. That makes him the agency's man in charge of developing and enforcing FAA rules in all areas of commercial aviation, including aircraft maintenance and inspections. He's with us in our Washington bureau. John Gallipol, who is at our affiliate WSYX in Columbus, Ohio, is president and founder of the Aviation Safety Institute. The Institute is a private, nonprofit organization that serves as a clearinghouse for charges of possible safety violations from the public, from airline employees, or anyone with an airline safety concern. Clark Onstead is vice president of Texas Air, which owns both Eastern and Continental Airlines. He's also a former chief counsel to the FAA. Mr. Onstead joins us in our Washington bureau. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. First of all, Mr. Broderick, you heard Bettina Gregory's report. The U.S. commercial jetliner fleet is aging. The average age of a commercial jetliner is said to be over 12 years old. 2,300 of the jets were built before 1968. 1/4 are 20 years old or older. And my question is, when is an old plane too old to fly?
I wish I had the answer. I wish I had a simple answer to that. But the fact is that it's a complicated question, and the best minds in the country and indeed the world can't answer that. What we can do is tell you what maintenance needs to be done day by day, week by week, and year by year on every aircraft. Each design is different. and each different design requires different maintenance.
John Gallipol, do you have an answer to that? Do you know when planes are indeed too old to fly?
If I had that magic answer, I'd be delighted to offer it to Mr. Broderick. I think our problem today is with these older aircraft, trying to fix them, is it's like having a screen door on a submarine. It's pretty difficult to keep the water out. And I think we're at the point where we don't have enough baseline data that can tell us when and where we should terminate an airplane. And that's where I think we should ask the FAA to undertake some research that will develop that baseline data.
Well, in other words, you're saying the dice are being rolled every time an aging plane takes to the sky.
Well, I think the dice have turned a couple of times against us. And Aloha is an example. And this flight yesterday, we were very lucky yesterday. There could be more of it. And I think the industry is very concerned about it. And I think the FAA is. And we've got to get on with the job. We've got to make some hard decisions in the very, very near future.
Well, let me put this question to Mr. Broderick of the FAA. If the FAA is truly concerned about all that, I mean, why isn't that basic research being done that Mr. Gallipol suggests to determine when a plane is too old to fly?
It is, in fact, being done. In the last couple of years, we have begun a very large research and development program in cooperation with industry, both the operators and the manufacturer of the aircraft here and in Europe. We're working with them. We've formed special teams throughout the country with specialists for each aircraft type. We have industry specialists who manufacture the aircraft, operations specialists who operate and maintain them, and FAA regulatory and engineering specialists working hand in glove together to develop the detailed data that is necessary. It is not, however, a game of chance, as you indicated earlier. What we seek is the ability to predict when things are going to go wrong. We're not perfect in that yet, but we're very good. You have to look at the sheer numbers of flights that every day run safely. We're talking about 15 to 20,000 flights a day involving some 3,500 aircraft. Perhaps 1 million people or 1.5 million people on a busy day are flying, and they're flying safely. It is true, it sounds trite, but it's true that the most dangerous part of your airline trip is to and from the airport.
Mr. Onstead, do you agree with that there is no real rule of thumb as to when to determine whether a plane is too old to fly?
I think the most important thing to understand here is that the airlines sell safety, and we spend billions of dollars on maintenance every year. In the case of the Eastern plane, which you referred to, Mort, the system worked. In other words, there was a failure, but if you look at the outside of the 727, there's a rivet row about every 20 inches, and that's designed to stop tears in the aircraft should this occur. That's to release the pressure so that the system worked. There are systems built into these planes that allow for these kinds of occurrences. Now, on these particular airplanes, the 727, there are now 196 special checks that are done part of a structural inspection document, which was put in by the FAA a couple years ago. And so that we are watching these airplanes very, very carefully. The airplane in question was inspected, as Bettina Gregory indicated, in September. And they undergo constant checks, and the more we learn about them, the closer we make those checks.
Mr. Onstead, when we come back, I want to ask you why the commercial airline companies aren't buying newer planes. And that question will come up when our discussion continues in just a moment. Continuing our discussion now with Clark Onstead, John Gallipol, and Anthony Broderick. Mr. Gallipol, let me ask you this. It seems that many foreign carriers, particularly European and some Asian carriers, have much newer, younger planes than the U.S. airlines have. Why is that?
Probably they have a better replacement policy, a decision made by the companies to make sure that they always have fresh, new, the highest technology airplanes available. What concerns me, not only the question about the aging of aircraft, but to Mr. Onstead, I would like to ask this question. Why, in this time when you claim that we're doing so much in the way of maintenance, are you, I'm told, exporting that maintenance to be done in Jamaica or in the Caribbean someplace. What's the reasoning for that?
Well, first, if I may, Mort, the predicate of Mr. Gallipol's first answer is wrong. Namely, that the foreign carriers have a better replacement policy. The best minds in the world, first off, there are more aircraft on order by U.S. flag carriers today than there ever was in the history of the industry. And two, the best minds in the world have said that these airplanes are safe to fly that we're currently flying. The fact of the matter is, with airline deregulation, we've been incredibly successful. We have more demand in the United States than they do in the rest of the world. And that's why the manufacturers aren't able to keep pace with the demand for new airplanes. Now, as to the question of exporting maintenance, the Texas Air companies do not export maintenance to any significant degree. We do over $1.2 billion worth of maintenance a year, and the vast bulk of that is done in the United States.
What do you mean by to a significant degree, or the vast bulk? What are we talking about percentage-wise?
Percentage less than 3%.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Gallipol? Does that match your figure?
Well, we haven't gotten a figure yet, but the new federal aviation regulation permits airlines under certain conditions to have their overhaul maintenance done out of country. And it just doesn't make sense to us because it opens up the opportunity for bogus parts or uncertified parts or questions of quality control to enter into the equation.
Well, what about that, Mr. Broderick? Why the new law? Why the new rule?
Well, actually, aviation is no longer merely a domestic enterprise. Aircraft that fly the U.S. flag fly all around the world. We have to provide throughout the world for adequate and safe maintenance of U.S. aircraft. There's absolutely no reason to believe that the British or the French or the Swiss can't do adequate and appropriate maintenance. Our regulations do not provide for unsupervised maintenance. Indeed, we require the same exact safety standards, the same surveillance by the same FAA inspectors overseas. These overseas repair stations must be certificated by the FAA, they must be approved by the FAA, and they must maintain our safety standards, or we will not permit them to do maintenance. There's no difference between Connecticut and Great Britain when it comes to safety standards for maintenance.
Mr. Broderick, some figures I saw suggest that some big U.S. airlines are spending less of their budgets on maintenance than they used to.
I think what you see is a reflection of creative accounting. An awful lot of maintenance expenses nowadays are capitalized. An awful lot of money is going into capital equipment, which is treated in a different way than day-to-day maintenance. The fact of the matter is that...
Let me just interrupt there. Are you saying there is less money being spent?
No, what I'm saying is that if you look at maintenance dollars as maintenance dollars per se, you have a lot fewer expenses in the kinds of hands-on work, and a lot more expenses in hardware, computers, and the technology that supports the people. What we have is maintenance technicians and maintenance engineers that are being provided with far better tools today, far more expensive tools today, than they were 5, 10, or 15 years ago. The provision of those tools does not show up in a capital maintenance, in a maintenance budget. It's in a capital.
Mr. Gallipol, you want to follow up on that?
Well, I can't argue the point that probably the airlines are investing a great deal of money in capital equipment, and we hope that by virtue of the fact that they do that, they will improve their maintenance capability. But I'd like to reemphasize here that Mr. Broderick talks about maintenance inspected or done in Connecticut will be, or in England will be as good as that in Connecticut. Well, the FAA can't possibly, in under any condition, keep a surveillance level on the entire U.S. carrier activity. They can't do it in the U.S. How are they going to do it in England or Jamaica or Australia, Taiwan or Singapore? I don't see how they can do it.
There are over 4,000 certified maintenance stations in the United States today. There are fewer than 200 maintenance stations outside the borders of the United States. We have inspectors stationed overseas. We have them in Frankfurt. We have them in the Far East. They are there to do inspections. They will maintain the same safety standards. We will not compromise on safety inspections, period.
Broderick, I want to interrupt right there, and we'll be back to you, the three of you, and continue our discussion in just a moment. Let's continue with our discussion now. Mr. Broderick, I'd like to move the discussion to the terrible tragedy, the Pan Am crash. Do you have any insight as to the cause of that crash? One of the British newspapers will report tomorrow morning that some investigators are saying that the evidence is truly pointing to sabotage. What's your view?
Well, it's difficult to imagine a tragedy like that occurring as it did without it being some kind of sabotage. But in the course of accident investigation, it's foolish to rule out anything until we have fully looked through all of the evidence. That's the only way we can learn and prevent future tragedies.
Do you think the evidence will turn up a decision within the next few days, or is it going to be a long process?
We always hope for an early answer, and usually we're not rewarded.
Mr. Gallipo, let me switch to you and let's go back a moment or two. Based on what you've said about maintenance and the general conversation about the U.S. airlines, do you feel good when you board an airline, or does it frighten you?
Well, it doesn't frighten me, Mort. I feel good that I'm able to use a system that's been around an awful long time, a system that is able to, by and large, protect itself in a favorable way. The odds are so much in my favor, and I know I can get to where I have to be today, that I don't worry about it too much. The American public, they don't probably feel the same way. I can say that if we have another accident like the Aloha crash, I think the American traveling public is going to revolt.
Thank you, Mr. Gallipo. And just briefly to Mr. Onstead. Mr. Onstead, Texas Air and Eastern, one of your companies, has had some problems the past few days. How does that affect passenger rates?
Well, we have seen no impact upon passenger rates, but more to put this question in some context. There were more people killed this year at railroad crossings by trains than were killed in U.S. aircraft accidents. And the President's Aviation Safety Commission, which was specifically charged to look into this question, reported in April that accident rates in U.S. industry since airline deregulation are down 67%.
Okay, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. That's our report for tonight. I'm Morton Dean for Ted Koppel. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline.
This has been a presentation of ABC News, where more Americans get their news than from any other source.